Many years ago, in the land of Umunka, a large scream was heard from the compound of Chief Uzodinma. People living nearby rushed to see what was happening. Chief Uzodima's body was lying lifeless on the bed. Udoka, his first wife, kept on wailing and crying. Ewo! They have taken food from my mouth. The world has seen my nakedness. She kept on screaming. One of the village women tried to console and free the body of her, but she refused, wailing even more and clinging to the lifeless body of her husband. The other wives soon rushed to where his body lay, and they all started wailing, except for his newest wife, Ugomma. She was only 16 when she was married off to Chief Uzodimma to clear her father's debts and raise money for her brother's illness, a choice she would forever regret. From the first night she got married to Chief Uzodimma, he ravaged her body like she was nothing. Her constant pleas and tears were ignored. When her parents visited, they turned a blind eye to her bruises, telling her how beautiful she looked and how good her husband cared for her. Papa, please, take me home. I want to go back to school. He maltreats me. Ugomma would tell her parents, crying bitterly. Ewo, na so man be. You will get used to it. That was Ugoma's mother's favorite word to her, pretending to care at the very least. Ugoma was forced to mature as soon as she realized she was alone. She envied her mates who had a normal life, going to school and enjoying their childhood, while she was a peace offering for her parents' fat pockets. She felt no remorse seeing Chief dead. She was finally free from all the pain and torture, even though she was 6 months pregnant at 16 years. Soon, other wives noticed as she went ahead her normal activities like nothing happened. 2 days after the chief's corpse was moved from the compound, the third wife, Isioma, who had always had Ugoma's back, aside other wives who did not hide their jealousy, approached her. Why have you not been able to mourn our husband? It will lead to a suspicion of your hand in his death if you do not mourn him, Isioma told Ugomma. Ugomma knew that if she did not mourn him, she would be suspected, even though she had no clue on how he died. She went to the hut to rest after her discussion with Isioma. She was in deep sleep when she was woken up by the water splashed on her. She was still trying to open her eyes when she was pulled by her hair. She was brought to the middle of the compound. She looked around and saw the angry faces of the elders and Chief's 5 wives. Why did you kill him? Amaka, the second wife, asked. Before Ugoma could speak, she received a resounding slap on her face. Amaka spat at her. You have succeeded in killing him. I am sure that you are happy. Cheta, who was Chief's youngest brother, cautioned Amaka and the other 5 wives, Udoka, Isioma, Chinaza, and Chidima, not to hit Ugoma anymore. Ugoma was told to go to her room as they decided her fate. She kept whimpering, hearing the voices of the other wives. She felt relieved hearing Isioma's voice anytime she stood up for her. She was scared and decided to run to her parents' place for shelter and protection. Why are you here? Go back to your husband's house, Ugoma's mother said. Mama, Biko, they will kill me. They are accusing me of killing Chief. I am afraid of staying there. Ugomma was already crying. Her mother told her that she could not stay as she would shorten their portion of food, and her younger siblings must eat. You are now a woman. Go back and take care of your home. Her mother banged the door at her face. Ugomma was shocked at her mother's tone towards her. Why did they choose to sell her to the chief? Why had they decided to make her a stranger in the home she grew up? She could not understand her mother's hatred towards her. She began to bang on the door, calling out for her father, but no one opened it for her. She decided to go back to the angry wives of late Chief Uzodinma. She became tired as she approached the hut. Her frail body fell to the floor. Isioma sighted her from afar and began to scream her name. Ugomma! Ugomma! She quickly took her into the hut. Ugomma stayed with the five wives was so unbearable that she confided in Isioma that as soon as she birthed her child, she was going to go far away from the village. Isioma supported her decision as it is a known fact that the other wives were jealous of Ugomma. They felt ever since Chief married her, they were no longer beautiful to him. Ugomma gave birth to a baby boy. She had suffered through the night in the labor of her son. In the morning, Isioma told her that she needed to leave the village. I am weak. I do not think I can move, Ugomma said. We have to move before the other wives know this. Pack up your bags, Isioma said in a low tone. Ugoma managed to pack her things with the help of Isioma. She carried her baby as Isioma followed behind with her bags. Isioma advised going through the bushes would be best to avoid being seen. Ugoma was grateful for the gifts of Isioma, who was like a sister and a friend. Isioma led the way. As soon as they arrived at the palm tree, she dropped the load. She started to whistle, and Ugoma's mother came out of nowhere. Ugoma was so happy when she saw her mother. She thanked Isioma for bringing her mother and she showed her mother her newborn. Her mother requested to carry her son. As soon as Ugoma's mother carried her baby, Isioma used a huge stick to hit Ugoma's head. Ugoma fell unconscious. Some hefty men came out of the bushes and took Ugoma into their boats. They handed Ugoma's mother some bags of gold, and she gave one bag of gold to Isioma, who was thankful. She went back to the other wives and told them how Ugoma ran away and she could not trace her. Ugoma woke up to see herself in chains on the boat. She began to scream, Mama, Isioma! But one of the men hit her on her face not to scream. She whimpered and feared for her life. God, what will become of me? How can one be this unfortunate in life? She wondered what they did to her son. She thought to herself, the men told her not to scream or they would throw her into the ocean. She was scared as she saw other people on the boat. Some were in chains and others seemed like they agreed to be on the boat. Ugomma was unsure of where they were headed. She wondered if they hurt her mother and Isioma. They made a stop at a nearby village and the leader of the boat and some other captives joined them. She could see the other men and the leader discussing. One of the men pointed at her. You, stand up. Ugoma was terrified to move. She looked at the man in fear. He became impatient and dragged Ugoma by her feet to their leader. I heard you killed a man. You must be evil for your mother to sell you off for a few bags of gold. Maybe a handful of gold, the leader said, smiling mischievously. Ugoma was shocked at the revelation that Isioma, whom she trusted with her, connived with her mother to sell her off to merchants. I did not kill him. I beg you, please, let me go. Her pleadings fell on deaf ears. Ugoma was taken back to a corner in the boat. They journeyed for 3 days until they reached their camp. These men were more brutal than she thought. They would beat the men at any slightest mistake while the women cooked and cleaned. Sometimes they would ravage them in order to bear children for them. They sold some of the captured men and women into slavery while the rest were forced to work for them. At night, they would put them in a cage and give them ridiculously small portions of food. Ugoma feared she would not last long before life might be snuffed out of her. Ugomma noticed an elderly woman sitting at the corner of the cage. She approached her and began asking questions on how she was captured. The elderly woman revealed to her that it was her husband who sold her to this man so he could take another wife and all her lands and properties. She cautioned Ugomma not to fight and always walk when she was supposed to, as they were known tyrants. They usually bullied the people of Afo village, which is close to here. Afo was known to be the wealthiest village. They had good mineral resources and were the attraction of tourists and entrepreneurs. They had gold, which made other kingdoms envy them, especially Umunka village. King Tobe was known for his lavish lifestyle. He was brutal. She further revealed that the king of Umunka village used the tyrants when he wanted to take over the leadership of other villages. Ugomma was shocked at the revelation. Was their alliance with the king the reason they could do their evil dealings in the village? Was the king aware of this, and why was her mother comfortable in selling her off? Goma had so many questions in her mind that night, but she knew better than to trust anyone. If Isioma and her parents could betray her, then who can she trust? One evening, she overheard the leader of the gang, Ikenna, arguing with his brother Obinna. They were to raid Afo village again, but Obinna was promised by the king of Afo village that if they would stop raiding their town, he would compensate them handsomely. The king has asked, we see him in 2 days, to agree and peace to reign, Obinna said. It is a trap, and I will not fall for it. Let us plan to raid the village, Ikenna insisted. Ugomma was listening to their arguments before she heard footsteps and ran back into the cage where she stayed with the other captives. Obinna went ahead to see the king of Afo village. He came back with 10 bags of gold, horses, and foodstuffs that could feed their men and slaves for a year. Ikenna was shocked at the accomplishments and boldness of his brother Obinna. The men hailed Obinna for his victory and the gifts he had brought to their camp. Ikenna saw this and became jealous. He did not like to share power or glory with anyone. He began to secretly resent Obinna. As days passed, she made friends with some of Ikenna's men. Undukwe, one of Ikenna's hefty men, was fond of Ugoma's jokes. In exchange for her jokes, she begged him to show her how to use the sword. He would tell her that women do not handle weapons. He tried brushing her off countless times, but Ugoma persisted, telling him how fascinated she was by how a sword looked. She would praise him always, and when he was so full of himself, he would begin to show her how he swung the sword in a fight, telling her off that she was a woman and no matter how much she tried, she could never be a warrior. Unknown to Undukwe, Ugomma was quietly plotting her escape from the camp. She knew she could not do it without a fight. Every night, she would go to where Undukwe had kept his sword and take it. Ugoma would go into the bushes and begin to practice how to fight. At first, she could hardly swing it due to its weight for her frail hands. She was barely given enough to eat after the day's job of farming, cooking, and cleaning. She pushed herself harder to swing the sword. After training, she would quietly return the sword and tiptoe back into the cage where the other refugees were. Her sleeps were always interfered by dreams of her time as a wife. When she wakes, she hears screams and struggles coming from Ikena's room. He would ravish anyone he chooses to, and if she refuses, it comes with beatings. Obinna would always fight for the captured women, but Ikenna insisted they were slaves and he could have them at will. One day, Ikenna decided it was time to put an end to Obinna's interference. He observed he was beginning to gain the trust of his men in his style of leadership. His love for power and wealth consumed him. He was ready to burn anything and anyone that stopped him from obtaining full control. He began to see Obinna, his only brother, as a threat. That evening, as Obinna came back from the farm with some of their men, laughing and talking, Ikenna was one side observing. This made him more furious. He approached the men and they greeted him and excused him. And Obinna, Obi-Wan name, I can see the men enjoy your company. They seem to be gravitating towards you, Ikenna said with a half smile that stuck to the corner of his mouth. My brother, you will always be our one and only leader. Nobody else, Obinna replied. They chatted for a while. Ikenna observed Obinna was looking good. Ikenna served Obinna some fresh palm wine. After some time, Ikenna proposed they go for a walk. When they were in the bush and out of sight, Ikenna said, why don't we have a combat? Let us see who is stronger. Obinna refused, insisting he was tired and they should head back to the camp. Ikenna refused and drew his sword. Obinna began to laugh. Why should we combat? What do I get in return? 10 plots of land, Ikenna answered. Obinna could see the seriousness in Ikenna's eyes, but he was still unsure why they had to combat. I believe that should be my share normally from the recent raids we have done. I do not have to fight for it, said Obinna. He turned to go back to the camp, but Ikenna pushed him to the ground. You own nothing without a fight, except you want to die here like a coward. Obinna began to feel weak. He tried to draw his sword, but Ikenna was faster and stronger. He struck him by his arm. Obinna screamed from pain, and he was unsure of why he was so weak. Right from when they were little, he had always won against Ikenna in combat. I can see the poison is beginning to kick in, Ikenna said with an evil smile. You poisoned me, Obinna asked. He began to cough out blood. Ikenna began to laugh, satisfied his plan had worked. Today marks your end, my dear brother. Say me well to our parents. He began to drag Obinna, who was so weak and was struggling with his last strength. He dragged him to a freshly dug grave. Obinna began to beg for his life. When he saw his brother Ikenna was not yielding, he began to scream at the top of his voice, Help! Help! But the more he tried to scream, the more it was faint as he was rapidly losing strength. Obinna began to cry. Ikenna started covering the grave. When he could no longer see Obinna's head, he covered the area with grass so no one could ever see. He began to smile. He was sure no one would ever reach this part of the bush. He quickly cleaned his sword with one of the leaves and went back to the camp quietly, hiding from anyone seeing him. Ugomma still went at midnight to train herself. When she got to where she usually trained, she was surprised to see Obinna's sword on the floor. She recognized the sword. She saw traces of footprints and decided to follow it. She saw an area that was covered with grass. She knew that something must have happened to Obinna. While she was trying to move the heap of grass away, she heard a branch make a noise. She feared she might have been followed, but she was sure the lights were completely put out in all the huts before she set out. She quickly hid behind a tree and remained as quiet as she could. Ikenna came back to get Obinna's sword, but was shocked he could not find it. He began to comb the area and he saw a shadow cast from the tree which Ugomma stood beside. Onye no there? Ikenna asked. Seeing the shadow, he knew someone was hiding. He drew his sword. He felt he had been followed and was not ready to let his secret out. Ugomma shivered. She was scared and held onto the tree for her dear life. She covered her mouth with her shaky hands. Ikenna began to walk towards the tree. Tears began to run down Ugomma's eyes and her legs began to shake. Ikenna was a few steps away from her. She knew if she stayed there, it would be her last. She picked up a little branch and threw it in the opposite direction to distract Ikenna. Ugomma began to run for her life. She ran as fast as her legs could carry her, but Ikenna was stronger and faster. He was already catching up with her, if not of the three branches on his way. Suddenly, Ugomma got pulled into the bush. The person held her tightly and covered her mouth to avoid screaming. "Stop fighting, it's me," the voice said. Ugoma recognized the voice. It was Ndukwe. She stopped struggling and hugged him, but before she could speak, Ndukwe left her and stepped into the pathway just in time to face Ikenna. Ikenna began to laugh. "So, you followed me into this bush? I did not think you had it in you to face me," Ikenna boasted. He frowned and rushed Ndukwe with his sword. They started fighting, but Ikenna was more skilled. In no time, Ndukwe lost his steps, and Ikenna struck him down. He dragged his lifeless body to where he buried Obinna. When Ugomma saw that Ikenna had gone deep into the forest, she ran back to the hut where the other prisoners were. She snuck in and lay as quietly as she could. She could not sleep. She shivered with fear. Her body was trembling as tears flowed freely from her eyes. It dawned on her that Ikenna was a beast in human form. Ndukwe's death hurt her the most. The next day, she continued her activities. She knew that she had to get back in training, but whose word was she to use? Ndukwe was dead. Ikenna suddenly started shouting. He told his men how Obinna, his brother, and Ndukwe abandoned their clan just because he insisted on raiding Afo village. She was washing the dishes when one of the slaves noticed she was crying. "Why are you crying?" one of the slaves asked her. She quickly wiped her tears and insisted all was well. She managed to force a smile. While she was cleaning the weeds, one of the slaves whispered to her, "It seems the master likes you." Ugoma looked up to see Ikenna staring at her bosom. Her heart was in her mouth. She did not want to be like the other slaves, subjected to having his child. She knew what it meant. She began to sweat, thinking of what to do if Ikenna insisted on being with her. The hairs on her body stood as her mind went back to how he slaughtered his brother and Ndukwe. "Uzo, bring her," Ikenna told one of his men, pointing at Ugomma. Ugomma reluctantly followed Uzo. "How many years have you been in this camp?" Ikenna asked as he was eating a goosey soup with his stockfish. "2 years," Ugoma responded, disgusted at how Ikenna ate his food. He ate his food with so much greed, and his mouth made some irritating noises as he ate with his pot belly shooting out. "By 6 p.m., I want to see you in my room, dirty slave. Make sure you clean up," he said, licking the soup from each of his fingers. "No!" Ugoma shivered as she said the word. Everybody stopped their activities to look at Ikenna and Ugoma. What bravery, they thought. No one has ever challenged him. They were scared as no one challenged Ikenna and lived another day. Ikenna swallowed the lump of fufu he was eating. He stood up and held Ugoma by the throat and threw her on the floor. "You, Akuna Akuna, your mother sold you to me because of how wayward you are. You killed a man and you now think you can challenge me? I had to pay for your brother's illness with extra bags of gold. You are worth nothing. Now, I want you to strip. The whole village, the whole camp will see your nakedness today, he said angrily. No, no! Ugomma cried bitterly, screaming at the top of her voice. She tried to stop Ikenna, but he was stronger than her. He tore her wrapper off her. Ugomma's wrapper fell on her feet, and she was completely nude before the whole camp. You are a slave, my slave, and nothing can change that. Ikenna, in his anger, began to beat her. Ugomma felt like life was being snuffed out of her. The elderly women began to beg, and even Ikenna's men begged for his mercy. They begged, but Ikenna turned a deaf ear. He beat Ugomma till he had his fill. Ugomma lay on the floor out of shame. She could not bear to stand up, to see the faces of the other slaves. Ikenna spat at her as he walked away, not caring if she was not breathing. He had shown he was the one in power, and that is all that mattered to him. The older women, who was already terrified, quickly covered her body with a wrapper. The women took her into the hut to dress her wounds, and Ugomma could not stop weeping like a wounded lion. As soon as she lay on the bed, the women began attending to her wounds. She remembered all that Ikenna said. She could not believe she was a sacrificial lamb for her siblings. It was not enough she was exposed to the horrors of early marriage as a child, and now she is being sold to slavery for a few bags of gold. God, am I this rejected and useless? Why is my life like this? Tears streamed down her eyes. She knew if she did not fight, she would die in the camp. She did not want to live her life like the old women who were attending to her wounds. She wanted freedom, she wanted justice, and she wanted to live. After resting, Ugomma wore her clothes, which were already in bad condition, given the number of times she had repeated them. She walked up to Ikenna as he was sharpening his sword. You need to prove you are the leader of these people. I challenge you to a fight of swords. No help from your men, just you and I. Ugoma trembled as she spoke. She feared he could call for execution. Suddenly, Ikenna and his men burst out laughing. They laughed so hard their tummy ached. Ugoma wondered if she had cracked a joke. A woman dared to challenge me? Ikenna asked mockingly. She's just a woman. Do not take it seriously, leader, one of his men said. He ordered Ugomma to go back to her hut as she must still be hurting from the beating earlier. Ugomma got irate. She hated they looked down on her. She hated they used women as they pleased for pleasure, and anyone that stood against them, they slaughtered. I want a fight. The winner shall rule this camp with its troops, Ugomma insisted more boldly than before. Ikenna smiled mischievously. I accept. By the first crow in the morning, we shall gather to witness the tragic death of Ugomma. The whole camp was scared that night. Nobody slept, and a sword was given to Ugomma to sharpen. She remembered Obinna and Undukwe, those who had died unjustly in the hands of Ikenna. She began to sharpen her sword faster. She trained with her bruises all night. The next morning, the birds were chirping loudly. The air smelt like sand, and cold breeze was so gentle on Ugoma's skin. It soothed her wounds. Ugoma quickly showered and ate. She armed herself and set out to the open space where everyone would gather. Surprisingly, Ikenna was already there. His men had asked him to put on his armor for protection, as his body was exposed and he could be hurt, but he insisted on going with just his sword. Ugomma is a woman, and not up to the men I have fought with. This ends with just a swing of my sword. He began to laugh, and they all followed him to laugh at Ugomma's foolish bravery. While the camp was quiet, everyone looked. The whole camp gathered, and they waited for the cock to crow, and the fight began. Ugomma was skilled and fast. Ikenna was strong. He started becoming impatient that the fight had lasted longer than his expectations. Ugomma began to apply more speed and pressure. She began to cut him little by little as his body was not covered with any armor. Ikenna began to bleed until he became weak. He fell to the floor, which had everybody surprised. The cuts all over his body were a lot. Ugomma walked up to him. This is for Obinna, for Undukwe, every maiden you have abducted, wasted, for the poor villages you have raided, for all your atrocities. With her might, Ugomma beheaded Ikenna. The whole slaves began to rejoice. It only meant one thing: freedom. They began to chant, Ugomma, the woman king, Ugomma, the woman king. Some of Ikenna's men surrendered to Ugomma, while the rest who refused to surrender because she was a woman was buried alive with Ikenna's corpse. There was cheering and jubilation in the camp. Ugomma knew it was just half of her journey, and she planned to go back to her village to dethrone the evil king, who knew of the abduction of his people and did nothing if he benefited from it. Ugomma decided to make peace with Afo and other neighboring villages. She sent some of her men, who came back with arms and gold, to peacemaking from the villages. Ugomma and her men trained for months. She planned an ambush on Umunka village with her men. They struck them in the middle of the night when their guards were down. They all fought bravely, and she finally captured the wicked king and waited for the day to break. She gathered all the villagers. She was about to make an announcement. A pronouncement when she saw her mother who sold her. Ugomma became emotional and angry at the same time. How could her mother sacrifice her so they could live well? Does it mean she does not matter? Ugomma walked up to her. Why, mother? Why? Ugomma's mother looked at her with no remorse and did not speak a word. Ugomma could see her mother had no love for her. Her eyes and expression said it all. She saw her little brother, Eze, hiding behind his mother. It seemed like he could no longer recognize Ugomma. Eze was much better. Ugomma was happy that at least her pains and suffering did not go in vain. She wiped her tears and addressed the villagers. No more shall we lose our children to slavery. No more child marriage. Anyone found doing this shall be thrown into the well, where they shall be forgotten. The villagers began to chant, Ugomma, the woman king. She went to the deep forgotten well in the middle of the forest to throw the wicked king. He begged as he was dragged, but Ugomma's heart hardened. She threw him into the well and walked away. Several days passed, and Ugomma had won freedom for her people, but she was a slave to herself. She was overwhelmed with sadness and struggled with abandonment. Every night, she would cry herself to sleep, remembering her childhood. She wished to be hugged, loved, and protected. She missed playing with her siblings and enjoying her mother's cooking. Where did she go wrong as a child? Why her? She cried herself to sleep. This was Ugomma's routine. She feared making friends and could not trust anyone. to avoid betrayal and being abandoned. Several weeks had passed, and Ugomma was summoned by the king of Afo village to appreciate her for the peace and security she had restored. She prepared with her guards and went to see the king. On getting there, she could not believe her eyes. On her right hand was the queen, while on the left hand was the princess of Afo, who looked exactly like Ugomma. The king could not believe his eyes. "What is going on?" asked terrified Ugomma. Everyone was surprised at the resemblance of Ugomma and the princess. It dawned on them that Ugomma was their missing daughter. The king told her of their lost daughter, who was abducted by a midwife many years ago. She asked for ransom to release the child, but fled with both the gold and their child. Ugomma's wicked mother arrived at Umunka village and started life afresh. Ugomma was shocked. It all made sense why her mother sold her to early marriage and slavery in order to save her biological children. Ugomma wept bitterly at how much she had been deprived of parental love. The king, queen, and princess hugged her. She stayed with them for a few weeks before returning to her village. She summoned her wicked mother and requested for her child, which was taken away. But she was told that the child refused to eat anything, was malnourished, and passed away a few days after Ugomma was captured by the slave raiders. Ugomma was sad and wept bitterly. She declared her mother was to be banished for 10 years without her husband or children. It hurt Ugomma to do that to the woman she had known as a mother, but she knew deep down that she was evil and had caused more harm than good. Ugomma refused to get married and ruled for many years in harmony with the support of her new family. It went down in history on how she stopped child marriage and slavery. This story teaches us about courage. Ugomma was courageous and trained well, hoping for the right opportunity. Pride goes before a fall, and like Ikenna, it ended badly for him. In all you do, ensure you are training and preparing for the right opportunity to be who you have called to be. Never let your past be the reason you failed in your future. Remember that God is the reason why anyone grows and moves forward in life. Also ensure that you are doing what you are supposed to do, as procrastination is connected to poverty, and time and chance happeneth to all men. It is God that brings the opportunity. Ensure that you are always ready to take it when it comes. What have you learned from the story? Do not forget to share, like, comment, and subscribe. Till we meet again. Bye.